The new middleweight champion of the world is Sean Strickland. A former welterweight came up to the middleweight division, lost his biggest fight to Alex Pereira by first round knockout, a rival of Adesanya. So everybody thought there's no way Strickland would be able to do much against Adesanya, who just beat Pereira. And lo and behold, the man has gotten so much better. Not only is Strickland now the middleweight champion, he beat one of the greatest middleweights of all time as a huge underdog, and it wasn't even that hard for him. He outstruck him, he outfeinted him, he stuck to the fundamentals against a flashy fighter. There's something special about the mental state of a challenger like Sean Strickland admitting that he's going to go into this fight and he's going to get hurt. That was his mental state going into this fight. I'm going to go in there against a monster, a legend. There's no way I come out of this not getting hurt. I'm going to get in this, I'm going to lose some brain cells. And he lost no brain cells at all. Crazy how that works. He accepted a certain fate that couldn't get much worse for him. So he went in there completely focused on the task at hand. And even when he dropped Adesanya, which is insane to think about, he knocked Adesanya to the ground in the first round. A guy who was known for quote-unquote pillow hands, right? This guy rarely ever drops anybody, right? He wins a lot of his fights by decision, and he goes and knocks Adesanya to the ground with a straight, beating Adesanya's looping punch, straight beating looping, catches him right on the chin, and puts him down. Do you know the kind of confidence booster that must have been for Strickland? And how worried that must have made Adesanya? I don't even think Adesanya in his dreams would have imagined that he would get dropped by Strickland. And then for it to happen in the beginning of the fight, yeah, 4 more rounds to go with this guy, and you know now he can hurt you if you risk anything? He can hurt you and potentially put you away with one punch? Now you might be asking, why didn't the other opponents of Adesanya do the same thing? If all of it was about the fundamentals, well, most of the guys that Adesanya has fought don't have this certain style at all. Most of them are all-in fighters. You look at Yoel Romero, you look at Paulo Costa, you look at Robert Whittaker, where they go so hard in. It's Whittaker blitzing in for a big shot. It's Paulo Costa swinging big haymakers. It's Yoel Romero exploding out of nowhere. Marvin Vettori just doesn't have the striking skill to do it. And Alex Pereira lost the second fight because he exploded and exposed himself, whereas Strickland never did that unless Adesanya exposed himself first. He was rarely ever the guy in this fight to do something crazy first. He waited for Adesanya to do it, right? Even Pereira said that, he should have just stayed calm the whole time and not go crazy. Jared Cannonier had a style to implement something similar, but he just doesn't have the reflexes of Sean Strickland. And that is one of the biggest differences between Strickland and all of Adesanya's opponents. He has developed all of his instincts and reflexes from so much sparring. He sees all of Adesanya's moves way clearer than everybody else. In one moment in the beginning of the fight, before even the knockdown happened in the first round, where Adesanya was up against the fence and he was going to move left or right? You don't know which way he's going to move. This is how he tricks everybody. Strickland threw a jab to his own left and pinpoints it exactly where Adesanya was going to move. This is something that most guys don't do well against Adesanya. Most guys lose him in this position, whereas Strickland foresighted it. He knew exactly where Adesanya was going to move, shown by aiming his jab at the exact place. And this happened so many times throughout the fight. That's why Strickland was able to pressure him and keep him against the fence for almost 5 rounds straight. And that also shows you that Sean Strickland understood Adesanya's movements better than anybody else. And the story about the fight was basics and fundamentals win. You don't have to do anything flashy. Strickland fights like this old school fighter, man. Puts up the Philly shell, walks you down, gives you no space, jabs, straights, front kicks to the body, and some counter left hooks. That's pretty much it. This guy was attacking Adesanya with pretty much 4 moves, and he won. Adesanya is more of the flashy fighter. He's more of the guy who's spinning around, throwing all different kinds of feints and stuff like that, and the feints didn't work again. The commentators were talking a lot about feints from Adesanya in this fight, but none of it was really working. It was kind of deja vu of what happened with the Jan Blachowicz fight, when they kept talking about, Adesanya's feints, and Jan kept reacting to them. Strickland was reacting to a bunch of feints, and it never worked. Nothing worked. Izzy still had a hard time of finding openings. And the game plan from Strickland was so simple. It's crazy that me and no one else thought about it. Never overextend unless you see Adesanya himself telegraphing a big punch. Because the thing about Adesanya's power punches are that he always flares out his elbows. And for Strickland, who spars as many times as he does, this guy lives in the gym. If you flare your elbows out on this guy like that, he's gonna see it faster than most other fighters because of all that time he has in sparring. He has more time in sparring probably than anybody else. And if you make those kind of telegraphs, he's gonna see those a lot better than other fighters. And you saw the defense. Look at him dropping Adesanya with the straight when he saw Adesanya flaring out for the big left hook. And it's a different kind of left hook than what Pereira hit Strickland with. The reason why Pereira caught him with that big punch, because Pereira sets it up a lot better. He conditioned Strickland better by throwing straight punches before he threw the left hook. And also, Strickland never trained with Pereira before that, right? After he lost to Pereira, he trained with him, which gave him a better feeling of how to defend left hooks. This is a great example to show you how good Sean Strickland's reflexes are, how clearly he sees everything. So Adesanya is feinting at him. And every feint, every time Adesanya extends his arm somewhere, Sean Strickland always has his hands in front of it. He's not overreacting. He's kind of like putting walls in front of him, barriers in front of him, in order to defend himself. But nothing is overreaching, nothing is opening up too much, everything is tight. So look, Adesanya brings up the left hand, Sean Strickland with his right hand tries to parry it. Adesanya extends that same hand closer and steps into Sean Strickland, and now look what Strickland does. With his right hand, he puts it up to the side of his head, and with his left hand, he puts it in front of that quote-unquote jab. Here comes Adesanya feinting with his right hand, and Strickland moves his left hand from the right to the left in front of Adesanya's right hand. He's moving away, holding up that tight right guard. Adesanya throws the left jab now, which gets parried by Strickland. Izzy feints with the left hand again. Strickland puts his right hand in front of it, and Adesanya did this all to set up the leg kick, which Strickland lifts his lead leg above it. The kick does touch the back leg of Strickland slightly on the full extension of it. And look how both the fighters defend each other's jab. When Sean Strickland defends Izzy's jab, he leans away slightly, parries it with his right hand, and only puts a small amount of weight on his back foot so he doesn't get off balance, in case Izzy continues the attack. Good balance, good defense, everything subtle. Now look when Strickland throws a jab, and Izzy reacts to it. Izzy, with his hands low, which he had pretty much most of the fight, he leans away from the jab, but leans a bit too far away to the point where he gets off balance. He has to move his feet in order to gain his balance again, and if you watch it in real time, his right leg starts stumbling. This is one clear example of the difference of the fundamentals between the two fighters. And you probably saw many times throughout the fight that Strickland constantly was lifting his knees upward. This was his kind of feint that was actually working on Adesanya to get him into motion. Every single time Strickland was lifting his knees, Adesanya moved. And one reason why this was working so well was because this was just to get Adesanya to back up closer to the fence. And he knew that if Adesanya backed up a bit too close, he would want to move out, and it gets him into constant motion. And Strickland had an excellent ability to cut off the cage. He was cutting off Adesanya so well. Better than pretty much anyone else has, other than maybe Pereira, who did a very good job at that as well. But the difference between Pereira and Strickland was Pereira exposed himself. He overextended a couple times looking for the knockout and got hit, whereas Strickland never did that. Strickland only really threw his power punches after Adesanya attacked first. And we have to talk about the front kicks as well. Notice every time Sean Strickland threw a front kick, it was to get Adesanya into motion, because every single time there was some sort of exchange or Strickland would move forward and throw a punch because he had constant pressure the whole time, Adesanya would backstep to plant, ready to see if there's an opening for an intercepting punch. And while he plants himself, Strickland hits him to the body with a front kick. It pushes him back and causes Adesanya to hit the cage or get close to it at least, and Strickland's on him with the pressure. Adesanya now is way too close to the cage than he wants to be, so he has to exit out, which tells you that that front kick was causing Adesanya to be in constant motion, not to sit down on something for some big shot. And when Adesanya did sit down on something while he was backed up to the fence, all Strickland did was throw a jab. Very little openings on him. Everything he was throwing when Adesanya was idle, a jab, a front kick. He didn't throw anything too big. Everything was small attacks, and small attacks create small openings for the opponent's counters. Most of the time he threw his right hand or big left hook is when Adesanya himself threw something first. So Strickland was throwing the bigger punches mostly as a counter. Now when we talk about Adesanya's jab, why didn't his jab work as well as Strickland's did? Well, it's because of where their jab is coming from. Even though Adesanya is very fast, where he's explosive, he has a long reach, and he didn't flare out his elbow on his own jab, why were those missing as well? It's because of where he's throwing them from. His jab is coming from the hip, which is a longer distance to get to the target, compared to Strickland's jab where his hands are up and he's flicking his jab right at your face in a straight line from point A to point B, whereas Adesanya has to pick up his hand first before throwing it. Look how Adesanya has his hand idle, right? Nothing's happening here. He picks up his hand, draws it back a little bit so he can get from point A to point B in a straight line. That's a slower jab overall than Strickland's. Strickland's left hand is up and he just brings it forward. There's no upward movement, there's no back movement. The only movement he's making with his left hand is straight to the chin. That's why it's much harder to see his jab than Adesanya's. And there was even a moment in the second round where Adesanya threw a jab from the hip. Strickland easily defends it, grabs it with both hands actually, which tells you how well he actually saw that. And then Adesanya tried to get it in again. It looked like he was a bit frustrated in that moment, so he started like playing with his left hand, feinting constantly, and then threw a flicker jab, but also from low up to the head, and Strickland still defended it. There was no power in this. Adesanya just wanted to touch him because he had a hard time touching him. Pause. And we have to give Sean Strickland so much credit for checking the amount of kicks that he did, because that was the biggest defensive hole that he had for his entire career. The guy just did not check leg kicks. At one point, I believe he was leading the record for most leg kicks landed on him. And against Adesanya, he checked so many of them and blocked them to the body, never got caught by the question mark kick, never got caught with any kick to the head or anything like that. The amount of times that Adesanya would throw a leg kick before throwing his question mark kick was pretty crazy. He was really banking on that. So many times throughout the fight, whenever Adesanya threw a question mark kick, he always threw a leg kick first with the same leg. So he'll throw a leg kick, then wait a few seconds with the same leg, come up and around for the question mark kick, trying to condition Sean Strickland for it. This is an opening that many people thought Strickland would have in this fight, that a question mark kick from Adesanya would be able to connect on him. But every single time without fail, Strickland defended the question mark kick. He has extremely good eyes, man. This happened many times throughout the fight. His defense was on point the whole time, which tells you that he saw through all of the feints. He saw through all of the trickery. He saw through all of the flash and won the fight through the meat and potatoes of the game. You gotta give your hand to someone who does something like that. I am pretty sure every old school boxing or kickboxing coach in the world that saw that fight are smiling right now, because that is what they've been teaching everybody for such a long time. The basics win you fights. And Sean Strickland won the middleweight title of the world when everybody counted him out through the basics. Insane, man. Absolutely insane. So amazing work by Sean Strickland, getting one of the biggest upsets in UFC history, comfortably winning a 5-round fight against one of the greatest middleweights of all time, handing him his second UFC loss.